Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. And I have to say, looking at the stack of research you've pulled for today, if you're a listener who likes stability or, likes things to stay in the boxes they're supposed to stay in, today might be a tough listen.
That is a very fair warning. It's one of those days where the news isn't just happening. It feels like the underlying operating system of reality is getting an update. And not a small patch, a full system rewrite.
A full system rewrite, that's exactly it. We are looking at a day where the literal rules of chemistry, rules that were written into textbooks 100 years ago, have apparently been broken.
Completely overturned.
And then we're looking at the history of how diseases traveled the globe, being completely upended by, of all things, ancient DNA.
And that's just the science. When you pivot to the geopolitical stage, that rules-based order we've talked about for years isn't just bending, it's snapping.
Snapping is the word.
We have the United States officially exiting the World Health Organization, a board of peace being proposed to, rival the United Nations, and the Arctic is suddenly the most contested piece of real estate on the planet.
The Greenland saga. Yes, we are absolutely going to get into that because the headlines have been wild. We've got sources today from Science Daily, The Washington Post, BBC, France 24, TechCrunch. It is a massive spread.
And the mission for today, I think, is to find the through line, because when you see something like obelisks being discovered in the human gut in the exact same news cycle as a water bankruptcy declaration from the United Nations, it can feel totally disjointed.
Right.
But the theme here really seems to be hidden realities, things that were always there, whether it's a molecular shape or a geopolitical vulnerability that we are just suddenly, finally starting to see.
Okay, so let's start with the things we couldn't see before. Let's start with chemistry. And I'll be honest, when I saw Brett's rule in the notes, my eyes kind of glazed over a bit. I hated organic chemistry. It just felt like memorizing a bunch of arbitrary rules.
And you were right to feel that way, because it turns out one of the biggest, most fundamental rules was, it was wrong.
Okay, so break this down for us. What even is Brett's rule? And why did everyone think it was so unbreakable for a century?
So this goes all the way back to 1924. A chemist named Julius Brett. He established this rule about a specific kind of molecule called a bicyclic molecule.
Bicyclic, so two rings, like a bicycle.
Exactly. Imagine two rings of atoms that are joined together, and they share a couple of those atoms. Now think of that shape less like two flat rings and more like a 3D cage or a knot. It's rigid.
Okay, I'm with you.
Brett's rule stated, very simply, that you cannot place a double bond at the bridgehead of that cage.
All right, definitions time. What's a bridgehead?
The bridgehead is the junction point. It's the corner atom where the rings meet. It's the anchor.
And a double bond.
A double bond is a very strong, very rigid connection between two atoms. Crucially, it forces the atoms into a flat, planar geometry, like they're lying flat on a table.
Okay, I see the problem.
You see it. The rule was, you can't put a flat, rigid double bond into a corner that needs to curve in 3 dimensions.
It would be like trying to build a dome with perfectly straight, flat bricks. It would snap.
Precisely. Chemists believed the tension, the strain on the bonds, would be so high the molecule would essentially explode. Or, more likely, just never form in the first place. It was called forbidden geometry.
Forbidden geometry. I like that.
For 100 years, if a chemistry student drew that on a whiteboard, the professor would just walk up, erase it, and say, impossible, Brett's rule.
And now some researchers at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, were basically saying, hold my beaker.
Essentially, yes. Neil Garg and his team at UCLA didn't just theorize it, they actually built it. They synthesized these anti-Brett molecules, or ABOs as they call them.
How? If it's so unstable, how do you even prove you made it?
That's the clever part. They used a really smart technique involving fluoride to trigger the reaction. And, this is crucial, they had a trapping agent waiting right there to catch the molecule the instant it was formed so they could prove it existed before it had a chance to react with something else.
So they broke the rule. Aside from, bragging rights and rewriting a century of textbooks, why does this matter to me or anyone listening? Is this just academics showing off?
No, not at all. This is actually highly practical. Think about the pharmaceutical industry. Designing a drug is like trying to cut a key to fit a very specific biological lock in your body.
And these locks, the protein receptors, they have incredibly complex 3D shapes.
Exactly. Until now, because of Brett Moss' rule, chemists just ignored an entire category of key shapes. They didn't even bother trying to make molecules with these twisted 3D structures because they thought they were impossible to synthesize.
So we've been trying to pick all these biological locks with a limited set of keys.
A very limited set. Now, suddenly, we have a whole new tray of Lego bricks. We can build in 3D in ways we couldn't even attempt last week.
So this could unlock treatments for diseases where the lock was just too weirdly shaped for our old set of keys.
That's the hope. It fundamentally expands the chemical space we can explore. It's a huge reminder that impossible in science often just means we haven't figured out the clever trick yet.
Speaking of things we haven't figured out, or maybe things we thought we knew and got wrong, let's talk about syphilis. Because the history of this disease is basically a 500-year-old argument about who to blame.
Oh, the blame game. It's a fascinating piece of cultural history, really.
Right. The standard story, the one I definitely learned in school, is the Columbian Exchange. Columbus sails the ocean blue in 1492. His crew comes back, and boom, Europe has a massive syphilis epidemic starting around 1495.
Right.
So the narrative has always been the Americas gave syphilis to Europe.
Or the flip side of that argument, which some historians have made, is that maybe Vikings or even earlier travelers brought some form of it to the Americas. But it was always framed as this import-export problem.
And this new study I'm seeing in the Washington Post, it just changes the entire timeline using aDNA, ancient DNA.
And this isn't just looking at old bones and, guessing based on lesions or something. This is genetic sequencing. This is hard data.
So what do they find?
They analyzed human remains that were found in Colombia. And these skeletons are 5,500 years old.
Okay, stop there. 5,500 years old. So that's 3,000 years before the Roman Empire was even a thing.
Correct. And most definitely thousands of years before Columbus. And in those remains, they found the DNA of Treponema pallidum. That's the bacterium that causes syphilis.
Wow.
It was endemic in the Americas millennia before any recorded European contact.
So it wasn't an import. It wasn't an export. It was just...
It was here. But here's where it gets even more nuanced and interesting. Using this ancient DNA as a kind of time machine, it allows them to build a phylogenetic tree, basically a family tree for the bacteria.
Right.
And it suggests the disease is much, much older and evolved in far more complex ways than the simple Columbus brought it back story. It completely separates the biological reality of pathogen evolution from the historical prejudice and the blame game.
It's just wild how much digging up old bones can change what we think we know about the present. It stops being about blame, and it just starts being about evolution.
And speaking of evolution and things hiding inside us that we had no idea about, we have to talk about obelisks.
This story from Popular Mechanics, it genuinely freaked me out when I read it. Obelisks found in the human gut. It sounds like the opening scene of an alien invasion movie.
It is a little unsettling, isn't it? Stanford University researchers were just mining huge genetic databases, basically looking at all the raw genetic code from human gut and mouth samples, and they kept finding these things that didn't fit into any known category of life.
When you say didn't fit, what do you mean? Are they viruses? Are they bacteria? What are they?
They're neither. The closest thing they can call them is viroid-like.
Viroid-like.
Right. So a virus usually has a genetic payload, DNA or RNA, and it's tucked inside a protein shell, like a little capsule.
Okay.
These obelisks are just the RNA. They're just circular loops of genetic code that have the ability to fold themselves into a very rigid, rod-like shape.
Hence the name obelisk.
Exactly. And the really shocking part is how common they are. They found them in about 50% of the oral samples they checked.
Wait, hold on a second. 50%. Half the people listening to this right now could have these obelisks in their mouths.
Statistically, yes. And they found them in about 7% of the gut samples, too.
And we have absolutely no idea what they do.
Zero. Total mystery. We don't know if they may be sick. We don't know if they help you digest food. We don't know if they're fighting off bacteria for us. They are just there.
That's the part that gets me. We think we've mapped the human body. We have the Human Genome Project. But it turns out there's this biological dark matter in our own microbiome that we just completely glossed over.
It's because our tools were looking for specific things. When we scanned for viruses, we were looking for virus signatures, for genes that build those protein shells. These things are simpler, so they just flew under the radar. It really highlights that the definition of life is a lot blurrier than we think. Is a naked piece of RNA that replicates itself alive? It's a tough question.
It's like discovering a new room in the house you've been living in your whole life.
A room filled with millions of tiny rod-shaped aliens, yes.
Thanks for that image.
Hmm.
But, while we're finding these new mysteries, we do seem to be solving some old ones. We have a sort of rapid-fire round of medical news today that feels surprisingly optimistic.
It really is. It feels like we're finally moving from just managing diseases to actually targeting their fundamental mechanisms.
Okay, first up, Alzheimer's. This study I'm seeing from UCL, University College London, it seems like a major pivot in how we even categorize the disease.
It is. For years, we've known about the APOE4 gene. The thinking was if you had it, you were at a higher risk for Alzheimer's.
Right, a risk factor.
But this new study is suggesting that for people who have 2 copies of that gene, it's not just a risk factor. It is a distinct genetic form of the disease.
Meaning, it's not a question of if, but when. It's inevitable.
For nearly 90% of those carriers, yes, it seems to be. But that's actually helpful news for researchers. It means we can stop treating Alzheimer's as this vague, nebulous aging problem and start treating this specific form as a genetic condition.
So you can target therapies.
You can target gene therapy specifically at that population, maybe even before they show any symptoms. It turns a probability into a very clear target.
And there's a similar story with the triple-negative breast cancer news.
Yes, this is historically the hardest form of breast cancer to treat because it doesn't have the normal hormonal receptors that our drugs usually latch onto.
Right. It sort of locks the door against the standard chemotherapy.
Exactly. But a new antibody treatment is showing real promise in not just slowing the primary tumor, but specifically in fighting metastasis, so preventing it from spreading to the lungs or other organs.
And the spread is what's usually fatal.
The spread is almost always what's fatal. If you can block the spread, you might be able to turn a terminal diagnosis into a manageable chronic condition.
And finally, in this medical roundup, a link between obesity and dementia. But this isn't just another being overweight is bad for you story. It's about a specific mechanism, right? Inflammation.
Yes, the Washington Post reported on this. The mechanism they're exploring is fascinating. Fat tissue isn't just inert storage, it's biologically active. It releases these inflammatory substances called cytokines into your bloodstream.
Okay.
The theory is that this chronic low-grade inflammation damages the very delicate vascular system in the brain over decades.
So weight management isn't just about heart health or, fitting into your genes. It's literally brain protection.
It's preserving the physical infrastructure of your mind.
Okay, let's zoom out. We've looked deep inside the body. Let's look way, way outside. Section 2, the final frontier and the AI arms race.
Yeah.
And we're starting with one of my favorite places in the entire solar system, Europa.
Jupiter's icy moon, a classic candidate for life.
Everyone loves Europa because of the massive liquid water ocean under the ice. But the problem has always been the ice itself, right? I mean, it's miles thick.
Miles and miles thick. And life, as far as we know it, needs 2 things: energy and chemicals. The ocean down there is pitch black. It doesn't get sunlight for photosynthesis. So the question has always been, where does the food come from?
And this new theory is the food comes from the ice.
It's a conveyor belt system.
Yeah.
The surface of Europa is getting constantly blasted by intense radiation from Jupiter's magnetic field.
Right.
That radiation creates all sorts of interesting chemistry on the surface, ice oxidants, salts, things that could fuel life.
So it's cooking up ingredients on the surface.
Cooking them up on the surface, exactly. And the new modeling, this is from Science Daily, suggests the ice shell isn't a static lid. It's actually churning.
Churning how?
Think of it like a giant, ultra-slow-motion lava lamp, but with ice. The heavy, cold, chemically rich ice on the surface slowly sinks down over thousands or millions of years, melts into the ocean below, and delivers that payload of surface chemicals.
So the shell is the delivery system. It's dropping food pellets into the cosmic fish tank.
That's a great analogy. It dramatically increases the odds that the subsurface ocean has all the necessary ingredients for biology to get started. It makes Europa an even more compelling target.
And while Europa is maybe slow feeding its ocean, it seems like black holes in the early universe were having a feeding frenzy.
This is more data from the James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST. It keeps finding these supermassive black holes really, really early in the universe's history.
Too big, too fast.
Way too big, way too fast. Standard physics says there's a speed limit on how fast a black hole can eat matter. It's called the Eddington limit.
Why is there a limit?
Because as matter falls in, it gets superheated and radiates intense light and energy. If it eats too fast, the outward pressure from that radiation literally blows the incoming food away.
So it chokes on its own meal.
It chokes. But these early black holes, they seem to have broken that limit. They were just binge eating.
A feeding frenzy.
Yes. They were consuming matter at a rate that just defies our models, which is the only way to explain how they got so huge so quickly. So again, it's another fundamental rule of the universe being challenged by new data.
Okay, let's bring it back to Earth and the intelligence we're trying to build here. 2026 really seems to be marking a pretty significant shift in AI, in artificial intelligence. We spent the last, 3 years just chatting with bots. Now it feels like we're about to start working with them.
That's the pivot exactly. The era of chat is ending and the era of agency is beginning. TechCrunch had a piece on a new startup called Humings In, and it was founded by some heavy hitters from DeepMind and Meta.
Right.
And their entire focus is not building a better chatbot. They're building AI designed specifically for coordination.
What's the practical distinction there between chat and coordination?
A chatbot answers a question. An agent does something. It collaborates with you. It's the difference between asking a smart encyclopedia, what's the best way to plan a marketing campaign, and telling a coworker, draft the first version of our marketing campaign based on last quarter's sales data. One gives information, the other takes action.
And the way we interact with it is changing, too. I saw a company called LiveKit just hit a $1 billion valuation.
That's a huge signal. LiveKit builds the underlying infrastructure for real-time, low-latency voice AI. We're moving away from the keyboard and toward that reality from the movie Her. The lag is disappearing. You just talk, and it responds instantly, conversationally.
But it's not all, smooth sailing and billion-dollar valuations in AI land. The CEO of Google DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, seemed to throw a little shade at OpenAI recently.
A little bit, yeah. Surprised was the word he used. He was surprised that OpenAI is rushing to put ads into ChatGPT.
It was pretty polite CEO speak for, I think they're desperate for cash and compromising the
I
mission.
think it could be that, or it could be just highlighting the fundamental tension in the whole field. You have this very high-minded, stated goal of building safe AGI, artificial general intelligence, for the benefit of humanity, but you also have a burn rate of billions of dollars a year on computing power and salaries. Eventually, you have to find a way to pay the electric bill.
And ads are the oldest model in the bill.
They are.
And speaking of paying bills, the military-industrial complex is also making a big AI pivot. We've watched drones completely change the face of warfare in places like Ukraine. Now, a company called Anduril is scaling up in a big way.
Palmer Luckey's defense tech company. They're expanding into a huge facility in Long Beach, California, and they aren't just building more quadcopters, they're building autonomous fighter jets.
That feels like a massive leap. From a drone operator with a joystick to no operator.
It's a paradigm shift. We're moving from software in a cockpit to the software is the pilot. It completely changes the economics and the physics of air superiority. A human pilot is expensive, requires years and years of training, and, limits the G-forces the plane can pull before they pass out.
An autonomous jet doesn't pass out.
An autonomous jet doesn't pass out.
It's this heavy metal warfare hardware meeting the speed of Silicon Valley software. But to build all this tech, both the AI and the jets, you need chips. And that brings us right back to the new Cold War.
The chip war. It's intensifying. China has quietly issued a directive to its big tech giants, Alibaba, Tencent, companies like that, to stockpile NVIDIA H200 chips.
Stockpile them. Like people hoarding canned goods before a hurricane.
That's the perfect analogy. They see the writing on the wall. They anticipate tighter, more comprehensive trade restrictions from the United States. They know that compute, raw processing power is the oil of the 21st century. If you don't have the chips, you can't train the AI models. If you can't train the models, you lose the economic and military future.
It's the new arms race, just with silicon instead of uranium.
And sometimes, in this race, the hardware just breaks. We should probably mention Rocket Lab.
Yeah, their new rocket, the Neutron. What happened there?
They had a test failure during a pressure test. The main fuel tank ruptured. It's just a grounding reminder that while AI code can move at the speed of light, atoms are still hard. Building orbital-class rockets is still one of the most difficult engineering challenges that humans attempt. Physics doesn't care about your stock valuation.
That is a perfect, if sobering, segue to Section 3, the geopolitical chessboard. Because if physics is unforgiving, the current diplomatic map is, well, it's just chaotic.
Chaotic is putting it mildly. The post-World War II architecture is being actively dismantled in real time.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The current U.S. administration. President Trump is very active right now, and the moves are big. Let's start with what the press is calling the Greenland saga.
This has been the dominant headline across the BBC, France 24, Deutsche Welle, all the European outlets.
Can you recap it for us? Because it started with a threat of tariffs, right?
It did. It started with a threat. President Trump signaled he would impose tariffs on Denmark and, by extension, Europe if they didn't engage seriously on the topic of Greenland. Then, after some intense back-channel diplomacy, he retreated on the immediate tariff threat.
Okay.
And then he proposed a formal framework deal, and the reporting suggests it involves mineral rights.
And the reaction from Denmark and Greenland themselves.
Like very firm, not for sale. The Prime Minister of Greenland has been very clear about their sovereignty. But here's the thing. It's very easy to mock this, and many outlets have, as some kind of vanity project, this Trump buys Greenland idea. But there is a very hard strategic logic underneath all the noise.
It's about the minerals again, isn't it?
It's about the rare earth elements. Greenland has massive, completely untapped deposits of them. Right now, China effectively controls the global supply chain for all the stuff we need for electric vehicles, for those NVIDIA chips we just talked about, for our phones, for military hardware.
So this move, however blunt the delivery was, is a clear attempt to secure a non-Chinese supply of strategically critical minerals.
Exactly. It looks like a real estate deal on the surface, but it's fundamentally a move in the resource war with China.
And the markets reacted how?
They loved it when he backed down on the tariffs. We saw a huge relief rally. The Dow jumped hundreds of points. We'll get more into that in the finance section.
But this disruption isn't just about islands and minerals. It's about the very institutions that have governed the world for decades. This Board of Peace idea.
It's unprecedented. The president has publicly proposed creating a Board of Peace as a direct alternative to the United Nations, which he has repeatedly described as a failed, bloated, and ineffective bureaucracy.
And he's putting action behind those words. The U.S. has now officially, formally, exited the WHO, the World Health Organization.
Via executive order. It's done. That ends an 80-year relationship. We have to remember, the United States was the primary architect of both the WHO and the UN after World War II. To just walk away from them is a seismic shift in foreign policy. It's a signal that says, we're done with the global club. We're going to pursue our interests on our own terms.
But is this Board of Peace actually getting off the ground? I saw reports that Canada's invitation was withdrawn.
It's been very messy. Canada's invitation was pulled without any public explanation. Brazil, according to an advisor to President Lula, has rejected the invitation to join. It seems to be struggling to gain legitimacy, but the intent is crystal clear. Dismantle multilateralism in favor of bilateral transactional deals.
Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, he gave a pretty pointed speech at Davos that seemed to address this exact thing.
He did. It was the talk of the conference. He said, the rules-based order is ruptured. He warned that we are entering a world of purely transactional diplomacy. No more allies in the old sense, just counterparties in a deal.
And we are seeing that transactional approach being applied directly to the war in Ukraine.
Yes. President Trump's envoys, I'm seeing Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner mention, met directly with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. The Kremlin's official statement after the meeting described it as constructive.
That word constructive has to be absolutely terrifying for President Zelensky in Kiev.
It has to be. Zelensky gave a furious, fiery speech at Davos. He was blasting the European Union for its lack of political will and for slow-walking aid. But the reality on the ground for him is grim. Kiev is freezing. The power grid is being hammered by Russian missile attacks. And now he sees the U.S., his main backer, negotiating directly with Russia, potentially over his head.
Putin's position is clear. Any settlement requires recognizing the territory he's taken. Zelensky's position is also clear. No territorial concessions.
And President Trump's stated position is that both sides want a deal and that he can broker one. But usually deals in this context mean concessions from the weaker party. It really feels like the diplomatic air is being sucked out of the room for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, the Middle East is also on a complete razor's edge.
Iran is the focal point. There are massive ongoing protests across the country. The death toll is heavily disputed. Some sources say 4,500. Others claim it's as high as 20,000. It's a bloodbath.
And the U.S. response?
President Trump has threatened to deploy a massive fleet to the region if there's any escalation. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard issued a statement saying their finger is on the trigger.
It just feels like every single region is a powder keg right now, waiting for a spark.
It does. And all of that uncertainty, all of that tension, it brings us directly to the financial markets. Because if there's one thing money hates, it's uncertainty.
Section 4. The bottom line. You mentioned earlier the markets rallied. That seems counterintuitive.
They did, but for a very specific and I think telling reason, the Trump trade is in full swing. The Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped nearly 400 points on the day he reversed the tariff threat regarding Greenland and Europe.
So it wasn't a rally because things are good. It was a relief rally. Thank God he didn't blow up the transatlantic trade relationship today.
That's exactly what it was. But if you want to see the real story, don't look at stocks. Look at gold. Gold is nearing $5,000 an ounce.
That is a historic, staggering number.
Gold is the fear index. You don't buy gold if you think everything is going to be fine and profits are going up. You buy gold if you think the dollar might collapse or a major war is coming. So you have the stock market betting on short-term policy reversals while the gold market is betting on long-term systemic chaos.
And it's not just individuals buying gold. I saw a story about Germany.
Yes. A German lawmaker is publicly demanding the repatriation of all of Germany's gold reserves that are held in vaults in the United States.
That is a huge signal of distrust.
It's the classic signal. When you trust your neighbor, you let them hold your spare key. When you don't trust them anymore, you change the locks and you take your gold home.
And in the corporate world, we're seeing a similar move towards safety and consolidation. Capital One is buying Brex.
Brex was the absolute poster child of the fintech boom a few years ago. The slick corporate credit cards for startups, Capital One, a huge old-school bank, buying them reportedly at a steep discount signals the end of that easy money era. The big established players are now eating the young disruptors who are running out of cash.
It's survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
But the scariest financial term I saw in your notes today wasn't about banks or fintech. It was 2 words: water bankruptcy.
This comes from a new United Nations report. And bankruptcy is the perfect economic metaphor for a terrifying ecological reality.
Okay, explain it.
It's simple accounting, really. The planet has a budget of accessible fresh water in rivers, lakes, aquifers that gets replenished every year through rainfall. We are now, as a global civilization, consistently withdrawing more water than that annual budget.
We are overdrawn on our planetary checking account.
We are overdrawn, and nature doesn't offer overdraft protection. The account is heading towards zero. And this isn't just an environmental issue, save the fish. This is a fundamental economic issue. If you don't have water, you don't have agriculture, you don't have cooling for power plants, and you definitely don't have chip manufacturing fabs. It's a crisis of management colliding head-on with climate change.
And speaking of the climate, the immediate weather map looks pretty angry right now.
It does. A huge storm named Ingrid is hammering the United Kingdom with 60-mile-per-hour winds. Here in the U.S., a massive winter storm is slamming Washington, D.C., and dumping huge amounts of lake-effect snow in Michigan.
And there's a real tragedy unfolding in New Zealand.
A terrible story. A landslide at a campsite on Mount Maunganui. There are teenagers missing. It's just a heartbreaking reminder that for all our talk of AI and geopolitics and markets, the physical planet we live on is still volatile and incredibly dangerous.
Let's take a breath. That was a lot of very heavy news. Let's move to our final section. We call this Deep Time and Hidden Wonders. Because sometimes, to get a little perspective on the chaos of the present, you need to look at hippo teeth.
You have to look at the hippo teeth, yes.
Please explain this story from popular mechanics, Renaissance medicine.
So researchers have developed this incredible technique where they can analyze the proteins that are still stuck to the pages of old medical texts from the 1600s. Basically, they're analyzing the gunk that was on the doctors' and apothecaries' fingers, and from that, they can identify the ingredients of the medicines they were making.
And I'm guessing it wasn't aspirin and ibuprofen?
It was not. They found traces of human feces, powdered lizards, and yes, hippo teeth.
I have so many questions, but let's start with the main one. Why on earth would you use hippo teeth?
We don't really know why they thought it worked. The best guess is maybe for toothaches. The doctrine of signatures, like cures like. But the truly fascinating part for historians is the trade network it reveals. How does a hippopotamus tooth get from sub-Saharan Africa all the way to a European apothecary in the 1600s?
It shows that complex global supply chains are not a new thing.
Not at all. Even in a world without steam engines or container ships, they were moving goods across continents. It also just shows the sheer desperation of pre-modern medicine. They were literally trying anything.
I think I'll stick to the antibiotics, thank you
Yeah.
very much. And from hippo teeth to something called black eggs. This also sounds like a sci-fi horror movie title.
It does. Scientists found these mysterious pearl-like black eggs at a depth of 6,000 meters off the coast of Japan.
6,000 meters. That's the Haddle Zone, right? The deepest trenches, crushing unimaginable pressure.
Exactly, and they find these little eggs that look like black pearls.
So aliens. Please tell me it's aliens.
It's not aliens. They turn out to be flatworm cocoons.
Which is somehow almost cooler than aliens.
I think it is, because we had absolutely no idea that flatworms could live that deep. It just shows that life finds a way to colonize the most extreme, hostile environments on our own planet. If a flatworm can figure out how to survive at 6,000 meters of depth, life is incredibly, incredibly resilient.
And finally, it looks like we have to rewrite the human family tree. Again.
It seems to be a yearly event now. This time it's Homo habilis and Paranthropus. New fossils have been found, about 2.4 and 2.6 million years old.
I remember Paranthropus from my old anthropology classes. They were the nutcracker men, right?
Yeah.
Huge jaws, specialized for eating tough roots, and they went extinct because they couldn't adapt.
That was the textbook theory. They were seen as this evolutionary dead end, a failed experiment. But these new fossils showed that they were actually much more widespread and adaptable than we ever gave them credit for. They lived for over 1 million years, right alongside our direct ancestors.
So they weren't failures, they were just a different successful branch that eventually ended.
Exactly. We have this deep-seated tendency to look at the past as a straight line leading inevitably to us. But the reality is it was a big bushy tree with lots of different successful branches, and we just happen to be the last one standing.
Okay, let's try and bring all of this together, because my head is spinning a little bit.
It's a lot to synthesize, I know.
We have obelisks in our guts, a potential new form of life that we didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have a water bankruptcy that threatens the entire planet's operating system.
It's this incredible paradox. We are discovering the hidden, fundamental mechanics of our own biological world at the exact same moment we are pushing our planetary systems to the absolute breaking point. It's a race between understanding and exhaustion.
And on the human stage, we have this impossible chemistry breaking Brett's rule, which seems to be mirrored by this impossible diplomacy.
That's the parallel that really sticks with me from today. For 100 years, chemists said, you can't build a molecule that way. For 80 years, diplomats said, you can't just leave the WHO, you can't just bypass the UN.
And in this 1 week, in January 2026, we are seeing both of those foundational rules being broken.
The old architecture is crumbling, both in the laboratory and at the United Nations in New York.
And the really big question is, what replaces it?
That is the question.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, I think. If we are rewriting the fundamental rules of chemistry and the very history of disease, and at the same time we are actively dismantling the diplomatic architecture that has structured the world for the last 80 years, are we entering a renaissance of new understanding, a breakthrough era? Or are we entering a dark age of fragmentation and chaos?
And with gold at $5,000 an ounce, it seems pretty clear which way the smart money is betting right now.
The smart money is buying insurance.
It is. But usually after the period of fear and chaos comes the new system. We just have to survive the transition.
Well, on that note, stay curious. Please check the sources if you don't believe us about the hippo teeth.
It's true. Look it up. It's wild.
And if you're in the path of Storm Ingrid or the U.S. winter storm, please stay warm and stay safe. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Take care, everyone.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debates. If you have been glued to the news feeds this week, specifically around January 23rd, 2026, you probably feel like the ground has shifted under your feet. And I don't just mean that metaphorically. We aren't just seeing a change in policy. We are watching the active dismantling of the post-World War II order. The UN, sidelined. The WHO, defunded and abandoned. In their place, we have this chaotic bazaar of backroom deals, coercion, and just raw transactionality.
It's been quite a week, hasn't it? But see, you call it a bazaar and a rupture. I think I call it a correction. We are finally stripping away the polite fiction of the last 80 years. The world is admitting that power and leverage matter more than a nicely worded letter from Geneva. From the trilateral security talks in Abu Dhabi to the standoff over Greenland, we are seeing the world as it is, not as we wished it to be.
And that world as it is looks terrifyingly unstable to me. I mean, the central question we are wrestling with today is exactly that. Is this shift from traditional multilateralism, the UN, NATO, to a new deal-based world order, driven by the U.S. administration and rising powers, is it a necessary realignment with reality? Or is it a descent into a dangerous free-for-all, where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must?
That is the question. And to set the context for everyone listening, let's just look at the scoreboard. Just in the last 48 hours, the U.S. has finalized its exit from the World Health Organization, leaving a $260 million debt behind. President Trump has launched a rival to the UN called the Board of Peace, and we are seeing economic warfare escalate from the Arctic Circle all the way down to the Andes.
It is the sheer speed of the demolition that's just breathtaking. My concern is that dismantling established international norms isn't a correction. It is, to quote the UN Deputy Chief Amina Mohammed speaking to the Danish parliament this week, it's a dangerous nostalgia, and she nailed it. When we replace the UN Charter, our moral compass, with luxury real estate deals in war zones, or when we treat sovereign nations like Greenland as assets to be acquired for protection money, we are stripping geopolitics of morality. We are leaving vulnerable populations exposed, and we are shattering the alliances that have kept a relatively stable peace for 80 years.
I see the moral argument. I do. And it sounds good in a speech. But I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores the results. I mean, look at the political will of the old guard. It has failed. The EU is paralyzed. President Zelensky said exactly that at Davos. He called them out. The world is moving toward tech diplomacy and resource realism. If the U.S. demands compensation for protection, or if the Global South seeks alternatives to a dollar system that weaponizes their economies, these are honest reflections of how the system actually works. The happy vassal state that Europe enjoyed for so long is over. It's rough, yes, but it's real.
Okay, let's dig into that reality, specifically regarding this proposed Board of Peace. This is really the flashpoint of the week. The U.S. president has proposed a new body to handle global conflicts, specifically the reconstruction of Gaza, explicitly bypassing the United Nations.
And why shouldn't he? The UN has been debating Gaza for decades, while the situation on the ground just deteriorates. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Because of what this board actually proposes. I mean, this isn't just about bypassing bureaucracy. Look at the proposal Jared Kushner put on the table at Davos. He isn't talking about peace treaties. He's talking about urban redevelopment. He's presenting renderings of Gaza as a luxury seaside resort.
It's a vision for economic prosperity.
It's a real estate pitch. The proposal is to disarm the population, move them out, and bring in $25 billion of investment to build high-end condos on the Mediterranean using U.S. weapons to secure the perimeter. It turns a humanitarian crisis into an ROI calculation. It treats the people living there not as human beings with rights, but as squatters impeding a development deal. It is grotesque. It's no wonder Belgium publicly denied membership and Canada's invitation was withdrawn.
Okay, it is easy to critique the aesthetics of it, I grant you. Waterfront property is a callous way to describe a war zone. But let me give you a different perspective. The U.S. is putting a concrete plan on the table. Disarmament of Hamas in exchange for safe passage, followed by a massive economic injection. And here is the kicker. Reports indicate that Russia has expressed a willingness to fund Gaza's reconstruction through this very mechanism.
Which should tell you everything you need to know about the company we are keeping.
It tells me that for the first time in years, the U.S. and Russia might actually agree on a mechanism If a coalition of the willing, even a transactional one involving Russia and the US, can stop the fighting and actually rebuild, isn't that worth more than another UN resolution that goes ignored? You call it a real estate deal, I call it a pragmatic solution to a problem that moralizing has it fixed.
It's not a coalition of the willing. It's a coalition of the coerced, and the rest of the world sees right through it. Look at the reaction from the global south. Brazil rejected the board outright. And we have this incredible, almost ironic moment where Chinese President Xi Jinping is urging Brazilian President Lula da Silva to defend the United Nations. Think about that for a second. We have reached a point where authoritarian regimes are posing as the defenders of liberal international institutions because the architects of those institutions, the West, are burning them down.
I find that irony fascinating, but I think you're misreading the room. China defends the UN now because the UN has become a venue where they can exert influence without cost. It's theater for them. Meanwhile, the actual power brokers are moving elsewhere. Trump disinvited Canada from the board because they aren't relevant to the deal he wants to cut. It's ruthless, but it clarifies who actually holds the cards. The Global South isn't rejecting the board because they love the UN. They are rejecting it because they don't want to be pawns in a U.S. real estate portfolio.
But that mentality, that nations are just assets or pawns, is bleeding into economics in a way that threatens the sovereignty of every nation on Earth. And this brings us to the weaponization of the economy. We have U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance explicitly stating that the U.S. expects access to Greenland's mineral rights as compensation for protection.
Which is a transactional way of viewing an alliance, sure. But is it wrong?
You're treating a sovereign nation, a founding member of NATO, like a tenant who's behind on rent. Pay up or we take the mineral rights. It's extortion. Denmark and Greenland are not a real estate portfolio. This is a direct challenge to the concept of sovereignty. If you can force a country to hand over its natural resources just to maintain a treaty, then treaties mean nothing.
Is it extortion, or is it just the first honest invoice they've received in decades? Look at the numbers. Europe has outsourced its security to the U.S. for 80 years. Now the bill is due, and suddenly it's extortion. And I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's purely unilateral aggression. Look at the response. The EU is in a panic. Ursula von der Leyen immediately pitched a plan for Arctic militarization. Why? Because Europe knows the free ride is over. They realize that if they want security, they have to secure it themselves.
But at what cost? You talk about reality, but look at the financial markets. Gold is hitting $5,000 an ounce. That isn't inflation, that is fear.
It's a hedge.
It's a vote of no confidence. When Germany, one of the closest U.S. allies, starts repatriating its gold reserves from New York back to Frankfurt because of geopolitical worries, that is a siren. They are worried the U.S. might seize their assets or that the dollar system itself is becoming a weapon they can't trust. The trust that underpins the global financial system is evaporating.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that this is exactly what sovereignty looks like? Germany, taking its gold back, is a rational actor protecting its assets. Just like the Global South. Look at Latin America. We aren't just seeing this in the West. We have a trade war erupting between Colombia and Ecuador, tariffs versus energy suspension. We have Venezuela reforming its hydrocarbons law to attract foreign investment despite sanctions. These nations aren't waiting for the World Bank or the IMF to save them anymore. They are playing hardball.
They are playing with fire. You call it hardball, I call it fragmentation. When Colombia cuts off electricity to Ecuador, ordinary people suffer. When Venezuela opens up oil to the highest bidder, while the U.S. allows China to buy that oil, provided they don't undercut the price, it's just cynical maneuvering. We are seeing the weaponization of basic resources, energy, food, minerals. It is a return to a beggar thy neighbor policy that historically leads to war.
Better to weaponize resources than to weaponize soldiers, isn't it? Or at least that's the logic. If you're Venezuela and you have oil, why shouldn't you sell it to whoever pays? Why should you be constrained by a U.S. sanction regime that hasn't worked to remove your government anyway? The U.S. is tacitly admitting that the market wins. China gets the oil, Venezuela gets the cash, and the U.S. looks the other way. That is the deal.
But while everyone is making deals, who is keeping the peace? This brings us to Abu Dhabi, the trilateral talks, the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine meeting in the UAE. And the silence from Brussels is deafening.
We have to talk about Abu Dhabi. That is the most significant signal of the week. The center of diplomatic gravity has shifted. It's not in Geneva, it's not in Brussels, it's in Abu Dhabi.
The meeting where the map of Europe is being redrawn without a single European in the room.
Exactly. The US, Russia, and Ukraine. The EU wasn't just late, they weren't invited.
And that terrifies me. We have Hungarian PM Viktor Orban, who's hardly a Brussels loyalist, warning of a $1.5 trillion debt bomb if Europe is left holding the bag for Ukraine's reconstruction, while the US and Russia cut a deal. We are hearing reports of WAN deals being discussed. This sounds like the partition of a sovereign nation being decided in a backroom in the Gulf, over the heads of the people actually living there.
I see why you think that, but look at the reality on the ground. President Zelensky is in Abu Dhabi, he's engaging. Why? Because, as he said in his fiery speech at Davos, the EU lacks the political will to do what is necessary. If the West isn't going to provide the support needed to win, Zelensky has to find a way to survive. A bad deal brokered by Trump and Putin might be the only deal left on the table.
A bad deal that sacrifices territory for a ceasefire rewards aggression. It tells every dictator with an army that if they wait out the West's attention span, they can redraw borders. And let's not pretend this is happening in a vacuum. The exclusion of the EU from these talks is a humiliation that will have long-term consequences for the transatlantic alliance. Europe is being told, you are not a player, you are a payer.
The transatlantic alliance is already fractured. We have Mark Carney saying Canada doesn't live because of the United States. We have French officials warning of a masculinist threat from U.S. ideology. The fracture is here. The Abu Dhabi talks are just the formal recognition of it. Europe can complain about being excluded, but until they have a unified military and foreign policy, they're just a large NGO.
That is a harsh assessment. But while the great powers are carving up maps in the Gulf, what is happening to the rest of the world? This fragmentation is devastating the global South. We cannot just look at this from a Western perspective.
I disagree that it's all devastation. I see agency. I see nations waking up.
Agency? Look at the UN report on water bankruptcy. Look at the fact that internet shutdowns have hit 54 countries in the last 2 years. While elites play 4D chess with peace boards, actual governance is collapsing. Half of Sudanese children are out of school due to civil war. Who is looking out for them in this new transactional order? No one, because there's no profit margin in educating Sudanese children. If you can't offer a resource to trade, you are invisible in this new world.
Merging. India is resuming Russian oil purchases, despite U.S. pressure. Why? Because it serves their national interest to keep energy cheap for their people. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area, urging unity on mineral deals. They're explicitly saying, do not let the U.S. or China pick us off one by one. This isn't chaos. This is the global South finally negotiating for better terms. They are realizing that in a fragmented world, their resources are their leverage.
But are they really negotiating? Or are they being coerced by corporate entities that are bigger than they are? You mentioned tech diplomacy earlier. We need to define that, because it sounds benign, but it isn't.
No, it's not benign. It's structural.
Exactly. We have a report from News Americas Now suggesting that companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft now have more power than states. When we talk about tech diplomacy, we aren't just talking about lobbying. We are talking about a world where a tech company controls the literal infrastructure, the servers, the AI models, the cybersecurity that a nation needs to function. If NVIDIA turns off the tap, a country's economy freezes. That is a level of leverage that traditional ambassadors simply don't have.
That's the reality of 2026. The pick and shovel phase of AI is driving the economy. The Magnificent Seven, tech giants, have market caps that exceed the GDP of the G7 nations. If you are a nation with copper, lithium, or energy, you have leverage because those companies need you. If you don't, you are in trouble. That is why we see this scramble. It's not pretty, but it's rational. It's the shift from political alliances to supply chain alliances.
Rational does not mean sustainable, and it certainly doesn't mean just.
Perhaps not. But the old system wasn't just either. It was just polite. It had rules that were selectively applied.
It had rules. It had recourse. It had a framework where a small nation could appeal to international law.
And did that stop the wars?
Did that stop the poverty?
It prevented a third world war. It created the longest period of relative peace and prosperity in history. And now we are throwing it away for what? For gold bars and land grabs? Let's bring this to a close, because we are looking at two very different interpretations of the same week. You see a correction, a clearing of the brush.
I do. Mark Carney warned of a rupture in the rules-based order. And he is right. But we are entering an era of honest transactionality. Whether it's the Magnificent Seven tech giants holding more sway than the G7, or nations like Germany and the Global South protecting their own gold and borders, the pretenses are gone. It is a rougher world, yes, but it is a world where nations are forced to take responsibility for their own survival rather than waiting for a savior.
And that is exactly what keeps me up at night. A world where every nation must fend for itself is a world of constant conflict. We are seeing it with Iran's warning that they have a finger on the trigger and the U.S. deploying a fleet in response. We are seeing it in the dismantling of the WHO during a health crisis. Replacing rules with deals invites aggression because it removed the safety net. Without a moral compass, without the UN Charter, flawed as it may be, the vulnerable have no recourse. We are trading civilization for a marketplace, and the currency is raw power.
The marketplace was always there. We just stopped pretending it wasn't.
On that somber note, we will have to leave it there. It is clear that the venue of diplomacy is shifted, from the halls of the UN to backrooms in Abu Dhabi and Davos, and that economic independence, be it gold, minerals, or chips, is the new primary currency of sovereignty.
Indeed. And for everyone listening, keep your eyes on the gold price and the tech sector. That's where the real votes are being cast.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We encourage you to look deeper into the source materials and decide for yourself. Is this a new dawn of realism or the dusk of international order? Until next time.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.